Are you excited? Mason asked Connor. Yeah, you could say that, Connor replied. How else would you say you felt about this newest mission? Nervous, Connor said. It will be the longest amount of time any of us has spent in space. 5 years isn't a long time when you compare it to the span of your life. Mason smiled. Plus, we will be the first ones to operate and fly in the newest available rocket design. That doesn't freak you out? Connor asked. Hell no. We aren't test pilots. This aircraft has been tested. No need for any worry at all. There is always room for worry. The two astronauts emptied their trays into the trash can and returned to their offices. After completing a few forms and waivers, they went to search for the rest of their team. Their squad was made up of Commander Mason Tillard, Pilot Matthew Gurney, Mission Specialist Mia Lawrence, and Payload Specialist Nissa Lane. The rest of the team was lounging in the break room when Mason and Connor found them. They all sat down together at the break room table and talked about their latest mission. What's the name of the new rocket we are flying in? Nissa asked. It is a lot like the Crew Dragon, but this make and model is more fuel efficient and can travel further into space without stopping. They named it the Night Fury, Connor replied. Has anyone seen the aircraft yet? Mia asked. It's been top secret for years. I can't believe it is finally ready to fly. Only a select handful of high-ranked personnel have seen the machine. So, we are just replacing the people at the International Space Station, staying for a handful of years, and then we get to go home? Basically, Mason said. At least the ride will be short. What is it? Only a 24-hour ride? Nissa said. More or less, Connor said with a nod. It is getting late, and our training for the mission starts tomorrow. I'm getting out of here and spending time with my family while I can. Connor said, getting up from the table. You're right. We should all call it. Mason said, getting up as well. The 4 astronauts bid each other farewell and departed from their headquarters. Mason went home to his dog, Charles. Connor went home to his wife, Amanda, and their 2 kids, Joshua and Heather. Mia went home to her long-term boyfriend, Alex, and Nissa went home to her son, Tyler. The team members' paths did not cross outside of work. They were close when they were in space together, but when they returned to Earth, their focus shifted solely to their families. They had all gone on missions together before. They had been traveling out of orbit together for years. Now came the time for their rotation. It was time for them to go and stand duty on the space station. To them, this mission was supposed to be easy. It was going to be long, but they had each other to make the time go by more quickly. The next morning, the 4 astronauts met in the training center to go over basic maneuvers and flight techniques. They went through their checklist, attended all their classes, and met again at the end of the day in the break room. They all chatted for a while before it got too late, and then they all went their separate ways. Days turned into weeks, which turned into months, and finally the day came for takeoff. The 4 astronauts boarded the Night Fury and strapped in. There were no windows in this aircraft, and it was significantly larger than the Crew Dragon, but it only had seats for 4 passengers. This aircraft was built to reach the deepest parts of space and safely return to orbit. They were using this aircraft for a short journey out to space instead of using it for a long expedition because the higher-ups required the travel miles on the aircraft to prove that it was, in fact, safe enough to travel to the intended destination. They were all strapped into their seats in one row, facing a large screen. Mason was on the far left, Mia was next to him, Nissa was next to Mia, and Connor was on the far right. Their harnesses were strapped and clipped into their leg straps. Once they were all secured, a countdown began on the large screen in front of them. They all took a deep breath as the numbers went down. 10-9-8-7. They said a quick prayer. 6-5-4-3. They braced their bodies. 2-1. They jolted forward as the rocket flew up. It was almost like riding a roller coaster, flying straight up, going up to the escape velocity of 25,000 miles per hour. As the astronauts were flung into space, they all gripped their safety belts and waited for the initial flight process to be over. Hour 1, Commander 1, this is Night Fury. Come in, over. Connor said into the radio. Night Fury, this is Commander 1. What is your status? We have made it through orbit and are now on course to our destination. Over. Good work, Night Fury. Contact us again when you reach the ISS. Over. Copy that. Over. Connor looked over at the others and smiled. There is no turning back now, he said with a laugh. As the spaceship glided through the dark abyss of space, the astronauts floated around their cabin. Nissa and Mia went to the sleeping pods in the back of the ship, and Connor and Mason worked at the control panel in the cabin. Every screen in this aircraft was up to date with the most advanced technology. Connor swiped his finger over the monitor and stopped when he reached what he was looking for. The spacecraft didn't have any windows, but there were cameras on the outside of the ship that channeled live footage onto the main screen inside. Mason and Connor activated the ship's front camera, and the screen flashed before displaying a vast universe filled with millions of stars around them. This never gets old, Mason said. I'm going to turn in and hope that all time passes while I am asleep, Connor said, unstrapping himself from his seat and drifting to the back of the cabin to the door. He pushed a button, and the doorway slid up. Connor went into his pod in the sleeping chamber and settled in before turning out the light and closing his eyes. Mason stayed in the control room and stared out at the nothingness around him. He was but a speck on the framed art called outer space. He has been an astronaut for almost 20 years and he has explored space in its entirety. Well, as far as their ships would allow them to travel. His team was one of the best in their operations. They were always called first for the next big mission. Standing on the ISS wasn't exhilarating, but you were still a million miles away from Earth and everything you know. After a few hours, Mason got up and went to the sleeping chamber to join the others. He settled into his pod and closed the hatch before turning out his light and trying to find slumber. Hour 10. Mia was the first one to wake up. She looked at her watch and realized she had slept for 10 hours. She stretched her limbs and left the sleeping chamber. She went into the control room and pressed the screen. It blinked and then came on. She checked the travel map, which charted out their trajectory, and looked at the small ship on the screen traveling along a red line. They were almost halfway there. Mia strapped herself in her seat and grabbed her book. She flipped open the pages and quietly began to read while she waited for the others to wake. Mason was the next person to step into the control room. He said hello to Mia and then slid into his seat. He strapped himself down and played with the monitor in front of him. I thought maybe I would sleep the entire ride up there, Mason said. Wouldn't that be lucky? Mia laughed. How is Alex doing? He is good. He just started a new job as an aircraft mechanic. He's working on planes and other aircraft for the Air Force. That sounds exciting, Mason said. He's very excited about it. When are the two of you going to finally get married? Mia smiled. When the time is right, she said. After 10 years, the time still hasn't come? Mason questioned. He's not ready, and I'm not going to force him. We are happy with the way things are. Why mess up a good thing? I guess you're right, Mason sighed. How's your ex-wife? Mia asked. Still as crazy as ever. She just took me to court over custody of our dog. Well, technically, it's my dog. I had Rover before I had Linda. I can't believe she took your dog, Mia said, shaking her head. What are you going to do? He said. My whole check goes to alimony. The only thing that pushes me through life is these missions. Staying out in space for 5 years is a vacation for me. Not for me. I would rather be home, Mia replied. Mason pushed a few buttons on his monitor and turned on the outside camera to look out at the sky. It was such a breathtaking sight. The way the vapors clouded around the stars and moved like cream against the black of the night. It was all so enchanting. Too bad everyone can't see what we see, Mia said. If everyone saw what we saw, it wouldn't be special anymore. Mia went back to reading her book, and Mason stared out the front screen. It wasn't long after that Connor and Nissa woke up and joined the others in the control room. They each grabbed a snack and waited for the spacecraft to take them to their destination. Hours passed, and they still hadn't arrived at the ISS. Hour 27. What hour are we on? Nissa asked. 27, Connor replied. Shouldn't we have gotten there by now? Maybe. We might just be moving a little slow. I'm sure it's nothing to worry about. More hours passed, and the passengers of the ship were getting anxious. Something is wrong, Mia said. It's been 35 hours. Try to call Command 1. Command 1, this is Night Fury. Do you copy? Over. Mason said into the radio. Silence. Command 1, this is Night Fury. Do you copy? Over. He tried again. There was nothing but static. Check the flight trajectory. Are we still on course? Mason pulled up the map on the big screen. They all looked at the tiny ship drifting across a red line. It says we aren't there yet, Mia said. How can that be? Nissa exclaimed. Let's just calm down. I'm sure it's not a big deal. I will keep trying to call Command 1, Mason said. Mason flipped through the radio channels and called out to the crew on Earth. Again and again he called out and got no response in return. Let's run a diagnostic of the ship and see if maybe there is something disconnected or broken, Mia suggested. Mason pulled out a keyboard from the dashboard in front of him and began typing. He entered different number and letter sequences and watched as everything on the screen came back clean and clear. The ship is running perfectly, Mason said. That's obviously not right. The comms are down. Nissa replied. I don't know what to tell you. The computer is telling me there is nothing wrong. Keep trying to call into Command 1, Connor said. Mason got back on the radio and called in repeatedly to headquarters. There was no reply. The radio played static again, and no one answered on the other side. This had never happened to any of them before. They didn't begin to panic, not yet. They still believed there was a reasonable explanation for what was happening. Any minute now, they were going to pull up to the ISS and relieve the team that had been there. They ate and stayed awake together as long as possible before retreating to the sleeping pods. Mason was the first to wake up. He climbed out of his pod and made it to the control center. He checked his watch before pulling up the screen that showed him outside. There was nothing as far as the eye could see, and they were creeping up on hour 37. Command 1, this is Night Fury. Do you copy? Over. He tuned into the radio. There was no reply. Did you reach anyone? Connor asked as he glided into the control center. No, Mason said, shaking his head. Any idea where we are? I don't have a clue. Does the map say we are still en route? The autopilot is operating exceptionally and on target with our destination. This makes no sense. If our destination was the ISS, we should have made it there by now. You think I don't know that? Take a look at the mission statement and look over the summary of this expedition. There has to be something in there that tells us more about what is happening. Mason pulled open the mission manual on the big screen. The two of them went over every comma, period, and number. The mission statement remained unchanged from before the start of their assignment. The Night Fury was supposed to be headed to the ISS, which only takes 24 hours at the most. Mason pulled up a map of the outside constellations to try to locate where they were. He didn't recognize any of the star patterns. They were lost. Did the autopilot malfunction? Connor asked. The computer says everything is in perfect working order. This doesn't make sense. I'll try the radio again. Mason spoke into the speaker on the dashboard multiple times, but received no reply. What are we supposed to do? Connor asked. We need to take account of all the supplies on board and start rationing everything out, Mason said. Who knows how long we are going to be out here? If we are going to survive, we need to be conservative and manage our stockpile and pray that something good happens to us soon. Connor nodded and made his way to the supply room. Mason kept trying the radio. He attempted to contact his team on Earth and also tried to reach the ISS. No one was responding to his cry for assistance. Mia and Nissa soon joined Mason in the control room while Connor was still taking inventory of their belongings. They didn't know what to do at this point, and all they could do was wait and see what happened next. Hour 32 panic had officially flooded the ship. They had no idea what was happening and whether they would ever be saved from this vast nothingness that surrounded them. Mason had turned on the gravity, floating around, pissing him off too much, and tried to think of something they could do to get out of this. What if we try to pilot the aircraft? Mason suggested. We don't have the sequence code to get past the autopilot. Headquarters could do it from there. but there is no getting past it here. Connor explained. I can't fucking believe this is happening to me right now. Mia chewed aggressively at what was left of her fingernails. We just have to stay calm, Nissa said. Let's all take a deep breath. Mia was the only one who participated in the calming ritual. Nissa had Mia do this until her erratic terror subsided. But as Mia sat in silence, her brain became overwhelmed with what-ifs. She got up frantically, breathing heavily, and she cried, We have to do something. What do you want to do? Huh? Mason spat. There is a jack-squat chance that this situation is going to magically fix itself. We can keep trying the radios, but other than that, we are truly fucked. Can we all be nice to each other? Nissa said, getting to her feet. Mia, you need to calm down. I have something you can take for that, and Mason, work on your bedside manner. Just because you are left in a dismal place doesn't mean you can bring everyone else there to join you. Mia and Nissa walked out of the cabin, and Mason looked at Connor. She's right. There has to be something we can do. Mason sighed and picked up the radio. Command 1, this is Night Fury. Do you copy? Over. Just static. I gave Mia something to help her nerves and left her in her pod to get some rest while we try to figure this out, Mia said, walking up to the two men. What is there to figure out? We are lost in deep space. No one is going to find us out here. No one is coming to help, Mason said, exasperated. Nissa shook her head. We can't think that way. She said, a croak in her throat from a sob she was keeping in check. If we think that way, then there is no hope. What the fuck are we going to do with hope? Mason snarled. I know you're freaking out, we all are. That doesn't give you permission to be an asshole. Nissa wiped a few tears that escaped her tear ducts. Hour 45. How much supplies do we have? Mason asked. We have enough to last us just a little bit. We had our own rations, as well as the rations that were to be given to the ones we were replacing. We were not prepared for our mission to go off the rails. How the fuck is this happening? Connor whispered to himself with bewilderment. They all snapped when they heard a loud bang coming from outside the ship. They quickly scrambled up and began pushing buttons that controlled the outside cameras. They searched each one and then went to the camera that showed the airlock. At first, they didn't notice it. It blended in with the ship's grime, which it had collected on Earth. Then the grime began to move. It wiggled around and crawled around the ship. What is that? Connor asked. I have no idea, Mason answered, perplexed. The crew followed the grime through the cameras as it slithered around the outside of the ship. Then it returned to the airlock. It maneuvered around until it found a vent. The crew watched as the blob began to force its way inside. Mason took off as fast as he could and reached the airlock before that thing could get inside. Everyone gathered at the reinforced glass doors and watched as the green slime poured out of the vent and dropped into a puddle on the ground. They watched as it reintegrated itself. It sat on the floor, not doing anything for a couple of hours. The crew began to disperse to try to get some rest. But Mason stayed put and kept an eye on the foreign substance that had invaded their ship. Hour 50, he was drowsy. He hadn't left his spot for hours. He had to go to the bathroom, but he didn't want to take his eyes off the live organism. With his bladder screaming, he left his post and ran to the facilities. When Mason returned to the airlock, the glob was gone. He looked around the room intensely looking for it. Hey, come here, he hollered. The rest of the crew came as he requested. It's gone, he said once they were all rallied together. Maybe it left, Nissa said. Should someone go see if it's in there? Connor asked. Of course not, Nissa said sternly. I think someone should. What if we need to repair something outside the ship? We have to go through the airlock. We can't keep it shut forever. Mason replied. No, 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 Nissa said, shaking her head. Who is it going to be? Connor asked Mason. Rock? Paper? Scissors? Mason asked. No one is going out there, Nissa screamed. Connor faced Mason and played the game. Mason lost. He took a deep breath and opened the airlock doors. Once he stepped inside, Connor shut the doors. Nissa and Connor pressed themselves on the glass to watch studiously. Mason took a deep breath and began looking around the room. When he was about to give up and walk back into the ship, the glob came out from its hiding place and approached Mason. Mason wasn't fearful at first, but he did begin to worry as it attached itself to his leg and squirmed its way up. Mason stopped it at waist level and tried to pull it off. The gloopy organism was solid and smooth to the touch. Its insides were gelatinous and it was glued to Mason as it crept up his body. Mason started to scream when it got to his neck. He clawed and he ripped pieces of the alien off of him, but it regenerated and continued on its course. Once it got to Mason's face, it spread out its slime and covered his entire head. Nyssa and Connor watch horrifically as the alien then begins to squeeze into Mason's nose. When it was lodged entirely in Mason's head, Mason froze in trepidation. It took Mason a minute to feel it begin to ooze over his brain. He ran to the doors and begged his friends for help. While he was banging on the door, Nyssa and Connor watched as Mason's head ruptured. Blood, brain, and bone flew into the air in every direction. Nyssa screamed as chunks of Mason slid down the doors. "Is it dead?" Connor asked hectically. Through the blood and brain matter, Connor watched as pieces of the blob came together until it was whole once more. Connor and Nyssa watched as it slithered away out of sight. "What are we going to do?" Nyssa cried. "Mason is dead. Are we going to die? What if that alien gets out and invades the rest of the ship?" All Connor could do was shake his head with uncertainty. Hour 62 Connor yawned as he watched the airlock. He was slumped against the wall, leaning against the glass, and gazing at no activity whatsoever. He peeled himself off the floor and got up to use the bathroom. He stretched out his rigid body and walked away. Nyssa and Mia were in their pods getting some sleep while Connor volunteered to keep an eye on the airlock just in case the alien found a way to get into the rest of the ship. After he relieved himself, he returned to his spot to continue watching for activity. When he got back to the door, he saw the glob attached to the glass, slimming its way up, leaving a streak of blood behind it as it squirmed. It made its way all over the entirety of the glass and stopped in the middle of the right door. Connor then watched as the organism began to bubble. The slime started to grow larger as it splattered its body against the glass. Then the glass started to break. Cracks began to spread slowly from the alien's position. Connor shook his head in distress and bolted to the sleep chamber. As he ran, he heard the glass behind him shatter. He pressed the button repeatedly to move the doors faster. When it was finally sealed, he went to both of the ladies' sleep pods and opened them. He shook the two women awake urgently. "What's going on? What are you doing?" Mia asked, confused. "We have to get to the cabin and seal ourselves in," Connor said frantically. "Why?" Nyssa asked with dread. "The organism got out of the airlock." Connor was somber as he spoke. Everyone gathered together and stood by the door. They were going to make a run for it to the cabin, which was the most secure place for them to be. The doors slid open, and the three of them bolted out. It came down from the ceiling. They were in such a rush that their situational awareness failed them. It wrapped itself over Mia's head, and she clawed at her face viciously as the glob took over. Connor went and tried to peel the alien off of Mia, but there was no point. The alien had melded itself to Mia's face. Connor watched her through the transparent slime as she was suffocated. Then the blob dispersed and went through every opening on her head. Mia cried out hysterically. Before she could get to her feet, her head popped open and all her internal matter flung across the hallway. Nyssa grabbed Connor before the alien could regenerate itself. They ran to the cabin and sealed themselves inside. Hour 72. They were hot and exasperated. Their stomach roared out with hunger, and their tongues sat dry, like still hot sand. "Should we risk going out and getting supplies?" Connor asked, filling the silence that had been hanging over them for the last 10 hours. "Not unless you want that thing to get you," Nyssa replied. "There is no airflow in this room, and the heat is drenching us with sweat. We need to find out why the air isn't moving, and we need to get supplies if we are going to stay here." Connor explained. "What are you suggesting we do?" Nyssa asked. "I'm going to go out there," he said, getting to his feet and going to the front monitor. He brought up the diagnostics and looked to see where the problem with the air was. He saw the red flashing light next to the maintenance room. "I promise I will be right back," Connor said before opening the cabin doors. Nissa let out a sob as he left her in the cabin alone. She sat on the floor and rocked as tears streamed down her cheeks. Connor walked precariously down the hall. He was 5 steps from the door when the lights turned off and the red emergency lights flashed on. Connor said a prayer as he walked forward. When he arrived at the maintenance room, he noticed the ECLSS had been tampered with. He set it right before going to the storage room. Every step he made, he felt more and more anxiety. When he made it to the storage room, he began to float up off the ground. Now, not only were the lights off, but the gravity was off as well. Connor grabbed as many supplies as he could before navigating himself back to the cabin. He was able to push himself to the side as the alien lurched at him. Desperately, he bounced off each side of the hallway, trying to get himself to the cabin before the foreign life form could reach him. He didn't feel it when it attached itself to his boot. As he frantically pushed forward, the alien slithered up his legs to his back. Once he got to the cabin doors, he banged on them frenetically. As the doors slid open, Nissa took one look at Connor and screamed. She tried to shut the door, but Connor was lodged in the doorway. The green glob glooped its way from Connor's shoulder to his chin and rapidly covered the rest of his face. Nissa watched only for a second as Connor fought for his life. She squeezed past Connor and sprinted down the hallway, hearing the wet pop as she went. She made it to the sleeping chamber and locked herself inside. Just for good measure, she got into one of the pods and secured it as well. Now all she could do was wait and see what happened next. Hour 88 she dozed in and out of sleep, her starved stomach continuously waking her up. She yawned and looked around the room as much as she could from the pod. Nothing had happened in hours. The alien just disappeared. Nissa knew better than to go out there to investigate. No, she was going to stay right where she was. She sat for hours with no activity happening around her. She was so hungry that she decided to take a chance and go get the food rations from the supply room. The supply room was closer than where Connor had made it with his rations. She popped open the lid of the pod and meticulously got out. She swiveled her head around the room with caution as she advanced to the doors. Nothing happened as the doors opened and she walked into the hallway. She made it to the supply room without incident and returned to the sleeping chamber safely. Maybe it had left. It was done with its destructive behavior, and now it has gone back to where it came from. She placed herself in the sleeping pod and secured the door. She let out a deep breath of relief and opened her food packaging. As she was eating, it came and it was on the inside of the pod. It squirmed its way up the glass door of the pod and stopped when it was directly head level with Nissa. This was it. She laughed to herself with tears running freely down her face. She thought about everyone she ever loved and how she would never see them again. She thought of every man who broke her heart and the ones she cared for passionately. How she wished she did more in life. She smiled to herself, knowing that she was going to be leaving this life with immense accomplishment. The glob flung itself off the glass and attached itself to Nissa's face. It felt like melted rubber as it sucked itself around her ears and gripped onto her head. She couldn't breathe at first, and she only wished that she would die just from suffocation. She felt the oozing slime clog and invade her nose, mouth, and ears. She thought the worst had come before she was able to breathe again. For a moment, there was solace, and nothing happened. Then she could feel it begin to wiggle under her skin. It squirmed from the front of her face to the top of her head, and then it started to burrow itself through her skull. The agony was so intense, and all she could do was laugh hysterically with tears running down her face. She laughed at the way life had decided to fuck her over. The glob began to expand, and once it reached its limit, it stretched, shattering the bone and stretching out through her skin. Pop. The alien regenerated itself and it slimed its way to the airlock. It made its way to the vent that led to the outside, and it morphed its body through the narrow openings. Once it was outside, it reattached itself and happily floated away.